21mm socket, take your lug nut off. All 5. First thing I like to do with any car that has ABS is I'm going to open that bleeder screw to push that piston back. Therefore, I won't cause any damage to the ABS module. And while that's nice and loose, I know fluid comes out, that's a good sign. I can just slightly snug it, and then I'll undo the caliper slider bolts. 14mm socket on these 2 slider bolts. I'm just gonna take them right out. Now I can really just give it another, loosen that up, pull that caliper off, and push that piston back. I have a catch pan down below. So now I need a pry bar because the caliper is really on this bracket. And I'm going to get that out, get my caliper tool, move that. I'm going to aim that right at my bucket that's down below. And I'm going to put the spreader right in there. This is causing guarantee that there's no air bubbles. I don't actually even have to bleed it half the time after. But I'm also not pushing dirty fluid or possible dirt back into the ABS module, which could get very expensive and dangerous. So once that's bottomed out, I'm going to hold it. Now I need to tighten that bleeder screw back with a 10mm wrench. I'm going to stop that fluid from coming out anymore. Just snug it. Take my tool out. And I like to use caliper hooks because I don't like putting strain on the actual flex hose. So we'll just put that right in there, and I'll utilize the strut, get that up out of my way, just like that. So before I take the caliper bracket off, I'm going to take my pads off. Just stops them from hitting my toes. And now it's a 19mm socket on these 2 back bolts going into the knuckle. Take the bracket off. Go. Now we can take the rotor off, and then we're going to clean up this hub with a wire brush. I have a little handheld one, that way I can get right up next to the hub on the inside of the studs. The idea here is to get rid of any of the big rust buildup, because that will cause the brake pedal to actually have a pulsation. We want a nice clean fit against that hub. So now that I got the hub all cleaned, before I replace the new rotor on that, I'm going to spray it with a little copper spray so it won't rust up again. So before you put a rotor on, if you have the vented style, if you bought the vented, granted the vents inside here are straight and not twisted, but they still want you to put the slots and the drill holes going into the brakes instead of away from. So make sure you put these on the correct way. Hear that? That backing is hitting constantly, and it's probably got rust up from behind it. So I'm just gonna really get this out of the way. Now I've straightened that backing plate out, no more noise. I'm gonna put 2 lug nuts on just to hold this in place, make it a lot easier when you're working with it. And that way I can clean up the caliper bracket and then install that. Oh, we just need 1. All right, so now when it comes to the brake caliper, how we want to do this is we want to take the tins off, the old ones, because the new brakes come with them. Try to always use new tins, please. I know it doesn't look like much, but look at that. And that's going to stop those pads from sliding freely, and they're going to get uneven wear. Look at, see how that's smaller on that side than bigger on that side. That's because this was not sliding properly in the actual caliper bracket. And another thing that gets neglected a lot is this rust right here. This needs to be cleaned. You can take a brass brush. You want that, no rust, no little lumps. They don't pass, not in my book. Because you're gonna clean this and you're gonna put some brake caliper grease in there, a light coat, put the new tins on, and that'll stop water from getting in there and then rusting and pushing those tins up, which of course will make the pads not slide properly. So you're gonna do that on both sides, and you're also gonna take the sliding pins right out. See these boots? Just squeeze it, give it a twist. If you have a small screwdriver, you can try that. Now, that's pretty dry in my book. Watch what happens. Can you hear that? That is not a good sound in brakes. You want to not ever hear that, because you want that slider to have a nice insulation of sliding grease. That's why they make a caliper grease. So you're going to take that, clean it. That pin's in awesome shape. Don't worry about it. Looks good. Take some new caliper grease. It doesn't have to be too much, but you want to coat it. And here's the key little lesson right here. You want to take this brush, put it right inside that boot, because that's going to fill that slider pin every time it slides back and forth. It's going to keep grease on that boot. If you can get some down inside, I'll put it right there. I'll show you. Right on the tip of that boot like that. Now my slider pin's going to grab that, and I'm going to spin that as I put that in. Get the air out, so when I push down, listen, no more sound. That is a proper slider right there. Do the same to the other side. So one other thing I want to talk about on this particular car and caliper, you can see that there are two different style top and bottom tins. So pay attention when you take it out. I know that this goes in the front, so that's bolted inside. That means this is the top. So the top part of the caliper has the little wings here, so I can set that aside. I know that the bottom one does not. And also one other thing to take note is the top slider pin should have a piece of rubber on it, and there it is. So that goes on the top. We're going to clean that. If that is swollen for any reason or missing, you need to replace it. Do not just use a swollen one, and definitely if it's missing, replace it. So we're going to do the same thing I did on the other side. Put some caliper grease inside that boot, and then grease up my new slider, my clean slider pin. All right, so now I'm all cleaned up, and I'm going to put a slight coat of caliper grease because I want to make sure that doesn't build up any rust. It doesn't have to be caked on. And this is the bottom, so we're going to use this tin. Just seat it right in the spot, push it down in place. I'm just going to flip it over, do the same to the top. Get a little caliper grease. I used a wire wheel, that's why it's nice and shiny. The brush sometimes works, but this one actually had rust chips, so it was floating, causing those pads. Do the same with this one. See the grooves, how they sit. Place it right in there. All right, so now that we got our hardware tins in the right position, ears go on top. That's where I like to put them because of the indicator and how it has to ride on the rotor. You want that to go into the top of the rotor as it spins around. So that tab right here is going inside that squealer loop. It's going to ride the seat like that, and then you put the bottom in like that. That's how they ride. But because it's got pressure on it, it's a spring, I have to hold that there. Trust me, it's not going to work. So if it stays, but I don't think it's going to. You might want to put the bracket on the car and then actually put the pads on. Let's see if I can do it. Okay, I got it. Before we bring that over to the car and mount it, I want to take the mounting bolts for that caliper bracket, make sure there's no rust buildup, make sure they're not stripped. And I'm going to put a little dab of a thread locker on there, just a little dab, lightweight, blue, and then we're going to torque that to specs. Now I can hold that, hold the pads, get my caliper mounting bolt. I've already put the thread locker on it. Start it by hand. Start it by hand. Now I'm going to put my caliper on. I'm going to take it right off that caliper bracket, that little hanger. Slide it right on. Once that's on, you are set to let go. See the flat spot? Make sure the flat spot on the top of that caliper is lined up with that flat spot on the slider pin on both top and bottom. Take my bolt for my caliper pin, start it by hand on the top and then on the bottom. Now I'm going to torque the bracket to the knuckle and then torque my caliper bolts. So caliper bracket to knuckle bolt is 101 to 129. I'm going to do the 129 foot-pounds because of the age of the vehicle. Now the caliper slider bolts are 22 foot-pounds. That's a 14mm socket. One last thing to do, you want to take your 10mm wrench, now that it's all mounted, you want to just make sure and snug that up, and then take some cleaner and clean that right up. Put my catch bucket right underneath there again. Make sure there's no more brake fluid. Now we're going to take off our lug nut that assisted us to hold that rotor down, and we can put the wheel back on. So now we're going to torque the wheel to 80 foot-pounds. That's the vehicle spec. Always go in a crisscross pattern. So the wheel torque is 80 foot-pounds. I'm going to do that in a star pattern. So now I'm just going to pump my brakes up before I check my master. Refill both those calipers, seat those pads. There you go, nice and solid. And let's go check the master. So the master cylinder is located in front of the driver in the engine compartment. Yellow cap, I'm going to take that off. And as you can see, if you get a light, you can see that this fluid is right between max and min. That means minimal. And you can check your cover or in your manual to get what kind of brake fluid the car takes. Check your manual. This one is .3, so I'm going to add some .3 fluid. check the level. Just a little bit more. That has a screen in it, and that's why that bubbles up. So now that I got it to the proper level, I'm just going to replace my cover. Make sure it's snapped down. Take some brake cleaner, parts cleaner, and just clean all that excess off. And it's a good way to make sure you can get the proper level too if you couldn't see it. Now you can take it for a road test, make sure your brakes feel great.